Hang on a second. Okay. Is my screen actually sharing? Yes.
Yes.
Earlier today, it wouldn't share until I moved it to the same monitor. So I don't know. Sometimes it likes me and sometimes it doesn't. All right. Well, welcome everyone. We may still have a few more attendees trickling in. But today is the 16th meeting of the Nantucket Short-Term Rentals Working Group. And our agenda today, we really have two objectives. We're going to, I guess we have sort of three, if you count the data, but we're going to talk about the input from the public input session, as well as what we heard from the planning board and the Board of Health, who was in attendance there and who I talked to the head afterward, that I can report back to all of you. And then we're going to hear from Process First with any updated data. We're going to try and actually keep that. We have an hour on the agenda for that. We're going to try and shorten that up and really focus on the anything that's really new based on NAREB data that they want to report, as well as anything pressing that the group has asked for related to the policies that we are considering. And then we're going to spend the bulk of the meeting trying to move toward consensus on our set of policies. We are not going to try to vote today because we want to make sure that we hear from the select board tomorrow before we do that. But I do want us to move as far as we can in that direction. That is, really try to examine and explore any of the components that people really feel like they cannot live with, and to see if we can find alternatives and or tweaks that are such that we can move toward a package that everyone is going to be able to live with. So that is our focus here today. Just by way of announcements, I know there was a message that went out to everybody. It has been our practice since early on in this process. It was requested by the group that if members of the public or members of the group send comments to us on behalf of the group, we forward them on. And similarly, I think Megan has been doing the same on behalf of the group. But we've also asked that data be specifically only coming through Process First. And so there's a difference between sort of sharing your opinions and your views and trying to send something that purports to be or looks like some kind of data calculation. So we're going to ask the group, as you saw, to not try to do your own estimates of what the numbers might look like if X, Y, or Z were to happen, and send that to the group, because I think it really does muddy the waters for the actual data that the group is relying on, which we are all relying on Process First to provide. So hopefully that clarifies that issue, but if there are any other comments on that issue, feel free to raise them. Peter?
Yeah, I just don't recall us ever having this discussion about not sending out the numbers, that's all. I mean, I don't have a problem with it, but I just don't recall it. And, you know, some things, wouldn't you rather have somebody say the green cow, there was one green cow on the field and 2 green horses? Or would you rather have them say there was horses and cows? I mean, I don't know, sometimes you have to use numbers to
Well,
make a
the
statement.
question is where do those numbers come from, and are they numbers that have been vetted by the group or by our data experts? So, you know, to say, I think that there will be this many cows or horses based on my assumptions is not helpful to the group. It's one thing if there's cows and we can all count them. So that was really the point.
I don't have a problem with it. I just don't recall us discussing it before. That's
Okay, Robin.
Yeah, hi, I was the culprit. I responded to Semenish and I didn't have a chance to respond to everybody else. I was not trying to purport that this is the data. What I was doing was giving everyone a tool, and that was stated in my note, to which they could go to whomever they felt, real estate agents, other people, and input their own belief about what the probabilities might be so that they could play with the data. So all I intended to do was to give a tool to the group to analyze the impact of a lever. That's all, not stating that this represented or purported to be what the data was, just a tool.
Yeah, okay, thanks. And, you know, I think it just got a little confusing for people. So like we, you know, I think to the extent we can count on Process First to help us with those data, even data tools, I think that will serve the group well. Jim?
I'm just worried about Peter seeing green horses. I think we should talk about that, Peter.
Thank you.
Pink elephants?
All righty. All right, let me stop sharing my screen here. Let's shift to reflecting and discussing a public input session. So you all saw the draft summary, and actually we should probably vote on that to approve that. So I don't know, Tom, if you want to help us out with that.
Sure, I'll make a motion to approve the June 1st meeting summary.
Second.
Great, thanks. John Kitchener,
Aye.
Jim,
Aye.
Karen,
Aye.
David,
Aye.
Peter Schaefer,
Aye.
William,
He's aye.
you can unmute when you're ready, William. Julia.
Aye.
Okay, aye.
Okay, thank you. Robin,
Aye.
Tom,
Aye.
great. Okay, so that summary has been approved. Curious to hear anybody's comments, takeaways. I know we touched briefly on people's, you know, what you sort of saw and heard at the session, but now that you have the summary in front of you, if there's anything anyone wants to share. Yeah, Peter.
I just think it's interesting that we're still getting the comment about why we need this committee. And, you know, this is the same comment we had when we first started, and it still continues. It should tell us something. I mean, you know, and I think we're listening to that and we're going in that direction, but I just think it's just interesting that they still feel that way. The other thing that came up several times, at least in my group, and I read it to others, is the bad information that's out there from both sides. And that's inexcusable, but there's not much we can do about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is something you all can do about that. It's a good lesson for going forward, assuming the group does end up with a proposal that is going to go to town meeting. I think it does speak to the need for education for voters in particular on what these proposals do and don't do. yeah, Karen can maybe speak to that at some point, Karen, when you're ready as well. And John, your hand went up and down?
No, I you know, she said it, so I'm good.
Okay, all right. Yeah, Julia.
I guess I had just a couple, one question before I make a quick comment, but about the demographics of the people who registered.
Yeah.
So we know the demographics of the people who registered. And do we, so, and then we know the demographics of the people who did the poll, which I think is probably more relevant than the people who registered. What is the neither in home ownership type? What does that represent? So we have, you know, are you a voter? It's fully understandable. What's your residency type? Are you a homeowner? And as part of the homeowner, you're either a homeowner, you're a renter, or neither. What does that mean? Would that mean that it's someone who visits the island but doesn't?
Could be.
Or a
Could be.
child of an owner.
I guess. Okay, so that was sort of confusing.
Yeah, I mean, I think we put that in there because you know, we know that there are some visitors who might have come to the meeting, right? We see that there's 5 others who aren't year-round residents or seasonal residents, so they might be visitors.
Yeah, the other in similarly to the relationship to STRs, you're an STR operator. That's pretty obvious. You're nor an operator or a user. You're an operator and a user, which I guess means maybe you rent when maybe your own place is rented or something of the sort. And then you're a STR user on the island, so you don't, you know, live on the island, or I'm not sure what that really means. And then other, which is really odd. Like, so the 14 would have said other, which doesn't really say much. So what I look at is there are 44 respondents out of 87. So half of the respondents basically said they're either an STR operator or they are an operator and a user of STRs. And that was half of our survey results. And so to some degree, I think it's skewed towards, obviously, when we look at the voter base, the work that I did is probably different than what First Process would have looked at. But when we looked at this data a little while back now, 2 years ago, it was close to 20% of the STRs that were registered with the state were owned by year-rounders. So it was like 400 units. So if you think 400 out of how many thousands of residential homes, of year-round residential homes that we've had, like 2,900, I think is the number. So my point is, and out of how many voters, my point is the number of voters who STR their homes is not a huge number. It's not a large percentage. It's a percentage that's important, but it's not a large percentage, yet half of the results from the poll came from people who either STR their home or STR property or of some sort. So these numbers, and I maybe didn't explain myself very clearly, but these numbers are very different than what the voter base would be representing, me, is what I want to say.
Okay, Karen?
I was just going to say, I think that the neither could be the children of owners or somebody like that. So I think I might have responded that way for myself because I'm not technically an owner, but so just as an example.
Thanks, Karen.
Any other reflections? I will say I was trying to do a little bit of an analysis of, I think because I have data that you all don't, that tried to show of the people who are supporting the policy packet as a whole, how many, how many of them, like, where were they on the different levers? That is like, do we have a sense? I think we have a clear sense looking at the poll that there are people who think that there is too much regulation in these regulations, right? That they, as Peter said, there are still those people who say, I don't really think STRs are a problem. I don't really know why we're regulating them, right? There are clearly those people who attended the group, and they tended to, on the poll, support the zoning bylaws, and maybe they were less supportive of the general bylaws. On the opposite side, we have people who would like to see more or more rigorous regulation of short-term rentals still than the policy package has. And you can sort of get a sense of those people because they were more likely to support at least some of the general bylaws and to oppose the zoning bylaw. And I was trying to do a little bit of math to get a sense of which of those categories is more likely to support the package as a whole. And it seems like it's about the same. So we have people who are concerned that there's too much, that the regulations seem to be too much, and they therefore seemed inclined to vote against the whole package. And we had people who felt that the regulation was not enough, and they seemed inclined to vote against the whole package. But we also had people on both of the other sides, right? We had people who seemed concerned it was too much, but they were still going to support it, or it seemed concerned it was not enough, but they were still going to support it. So I just thought if there were some clear leaning there from the data, and I didn't do this in a way that I mathematically could share because I just didn't have time to do that. You know, if there were some really clear outcome there, it would have been interesting to share with the group. But what it looks like from what we have is that, you know, people have a range of views on the different policy proposals. There are those who, on the extremes, who seem to fall more on just, we want none, or we want more, or we want less regulation, or we want more regulation. And that doesn't correlate with how likely they are to support the package as a whole, at least on this poll. Julia, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I'm sort of curious, like when you look at the people who are not supportive of the package, and you say there are people on both sides,
Yeah.
what is the percentage of people on both sides? Meaning, like, you can see the next level that we can't see. So what's the percentage of people who say, I don't want any regulations, so I don't like this proposal? And the percentage that say, I don't like, it's not enough for me, I want more.
Yeah, so my rough calculation was the number of people who said, who support or highly support the zoning regulation and support or highly support the package as a whole was about 17 people, or 16%. The number of people who support or highly support the zoning, but oppose or highly oppose the package as a whole was about 15 people.
15%. Yeah.
Or 14%. So it was like pretty similar.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all, actually. My guess so far has been that it's about 20% on each side, sort of they're, you know, sort of bent on.
And then the people who opposed or highly opposed the zoning, but supported or highly supported the package anyway, there were 18 people. So like 17.
Oh, yeah, you're saying people because it was basically 100 people. So it's like percentage roughly.
Yeah. And then, or 17%, right? And then the fourth bucket that I looked at, which was people who opposed the zoning and also then opposed the package as a whole, was 11 people.
Yeah. It's
Right,
still hard to
totally.
know why they're,
Actually,
little
a bit less, right?
yeah. I guess my concern is that, you know, to the extent that this group is going to use this data to formulate how to move forward, I think this should be really, you know, taken with a huge grain of salt, because it does not represent the voter base. And our task is to have a highly supportive proposal for voters.
Yes, I will add, though, your task is to have a highly supported approach for everybody, right? That's why this group doesn't only represent voters. So you are sure you do, of course, want it to get supported by town meeting, but you also want a set of policies that work for everybody, right? And that the people invested in Nantucket can overall support. So
Well, I'm not sure I completely agree with that, Stacy. And I agree in a sense that it should be something that is that supports the tradition and the, you know, the goals of the group, but it shouldn't. It's going to be very hard to have something that everyone can support, right? That's just a really hard.
But they are looking for broad public support, not exclusively broad public support.
Right, but I think there are two success measures in terms of will we have succeeded?
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, one is that it's overwhelmingly supported at town meeting, not just by 2/3.
Right, significantly margin.
Right.
Significant margin, yeah. Yeah.
And that's, anyway, so I just.
And that it has broad, so I totally agree with you, but I just want to be clear that so the poll, as you're saying, has a lot of limitations in how much it can tell us about how well it will be supported at town meeting. But it does tell us about the people who are invested in paying attention to this. It gives us a sense of where they are and the kind of support that it has from the stakeholders as a whole, at least the ones who are most tuned in or were able to participate in this meeting. Yep. So this is not, I don't think the group should over analyze or take too much meaning out of this poll. It just gives a little bit of a flavor of where people are. That's all. Peter.
Just one thing. We need to, when we do polls like this, we need to put it in English. Understandable by anybody, not necessarily somebody who's been following this all along. And I don't think that poll was necessarily done that way. So it's just something to think about, is just so it's easy to understand what they're voting for and why they're voting for it in that context. I don't think this was done that way.
Oh, okay. Understood. I mean, I think the questions mirrored exactly the topics they'd been discussing for the
I understand that,
hour. So,
but that doesn't necessarily mean they've been listening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jim.
Thanks. First of all, I think we all want to thank Smaney. This must have been a whole lot of work to collate all this and synthesize it. So thanks, Smaney. It was a lot of work. On the poll, I totally agree with Julia. It's not at all representative. However, the fact that people both for and against seem to have the same, for and against regulations, et cetera, seem to have roughly the same support may indicate, even with this small and unbalanced sample, it may indicate that we're sort of in the middle that might work. Now, I do want to go back to our charter, which was to come together on a set of policies that will get overwhelming support, even more than 2/3. That's a wonderful goal. And when the select board set it up, I think they were thinking very high, but they knew then, they know now, this is very controversial and contentious issues. And to find something with way more than 2/3 support, that seems like magical thinking to me. However, it's a great goal. I just don't want us to feel that we, that the regulations are not good and viable if they don't get, 80% support. So I just think that's unrealistic. This is contentious stuff. Our committee itself is composed of people of different sides, which is great. We're trying to work together. I hope we will again today and listen to each other and really, try to get to some good decisions. But that's an extremely difficult goal that was set up, and I hope we can get as close to it as possible.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. We're gonna look under every rock and cranny and do our best to try and get there, and then we're gonna move forward. John.
Yeah, just a couple of points. I mean, just thinking about policies must work for everyone. I obviously agree with that the article's got to have something in there for seasonal, something more than seasonal, and year-round residents. But it is the voters that are going to pass this in the end. So I would just say, let's remember policies must work for everyone. But the voters have to be able to recognize in this package significant value for themselves. Because if they don't, if it looks too one-sided, that's not giving them very much, then they're going to vote against it. So I think we really have to be very serious about that. The other thing is, and David, maybe you can just confirm this if it's true, but we can use whatever adjectives we want about the degree of consensus. But at town meeting, it's 2/3. If it's 2/3 plus one, it's going through. David, is that true? Is that true, or is that something different?
It's a supermajority for zoning, and it's for the general bylaw. It's a simple majority, I believe.
Yeah. So sort of huge consensus, all of that on the day. It's really 2/3 then, because we've got to have both of them pass. So yeah. So
yeah, and
that's
just
all.
to say, I mean, I think as Jim said, the group that put this together, their aspirations was for this committee to try and advance something that would have as much support as possible, right? And like, we know that this committee, this working group, is not made up only of voters, right? So even within this group, we need to get, they also made it so that we didn't have to have, 9 out of 9 support in this group for it to be able to move forward, right? They set the threshold at 7 out of 9. But, my aspiration is still 9 out of 9, but we settle for 7 out of 9. And if it's less than 7 out of 9, then I think it goes back to the select board to figure out what to do. All right, let's move on to data. And Matt, handing it over to you.
Thank you, Stacy. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
So first one, start addressing NARAB data. I think you all have probably seen the report. I looked through the report, and my overwhelming feeling was there's nothing in there that was majorly new or different than we expected or we knew. And so, yeah, it didn't, there's nothing in there that made me feel like I had to really change what I was doing or the questions I was really focused on for you all. The one answer we don't still have is active listings at any one time. And the reason for that is it's a really challenging question, and it's something that would require pairing a partially anonymized data set from the platforms with the data sets from the streets. It's something that's possible, but at the time, based on the cost of doing it, so it would be beyond the scope of work that NARAB had proposed, and it's something that we could tackle together moving forward. But the cost and the effort to do it, I don't believe changes anything that you guys are working on. And so we haven't, it's not something I'm particularly worried about. If we look at what the information is and how that number might change what you guys are talking about, I don't think it particularly changes anything. So my recommendation is it's not something you have to try to dive deeper into, but largely just that the NARAB information sort of validates what you guys have been seeing and knew already. Let me start there. Does anyone have questions about that? Jim.
I was surprised by the NAREB data in 2022 that 61% of the rentals were a week or less, which meant that 39% were more than a week, which surprised me. I thought that was a lot more than I expected. I realized that the AirDNA data may go in the other direction, but did that surprise you that it was that much? And does that bump our overall understanding of the average term of rental, like at all, or any more than you expected?
Those are different questions at the end. This is what I expected. You know, we knew that the offices like to list per week. So the fact that most of their listings were a week and everything else was greater, short of some kind of small percentage that were shortened from a week, probably what I've been told is usually due to ferry reservations or weather. Doesn't surprise me. They line up with the numbers I had heard preliminarily. And, you know, if anything, what it says is on average, an ARAB listing is longer than a week, which is what I was under the impression of all along. Does that answer your
It
question?
changed a little bit my perception of how difficult it might be for someone to get a 2-week rental if there were a regulation that would benefit them on that. And it made me feel that maybe it would be slightly easier than we had thought. That's all. I was surprised that the 61%, I thought it'd be more like 75 or 80%. So anyway, that's just my reaction to it. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Dave?
For me, the shocking statistic, or I don't know if it was shocking, was the count of properties by average day rented per year, and that a very large majority rented for 39 days or less. And I found that to be a much larger number than I thought it was going to be.
I think it's like 65% or something like that if I'm doing math quickly off the top of my head. Yeah, and I think, yeah, I have nothing to add to that. Other than, yeah, I think it's about 2/3. Robin?
Yeah, Matt, I don't have the data set in front of me. I'm trying to bring it up, but just to Jim's point, NAREB, NAREB doesn't really offer less than a week. And I just wanted to get your interpretation. Whereas Airbnb, there are some that offer 2-day rentals, 3-day rentals. And just, in terms of the percentage of listings or the percentage of contracts that go through Airbnb, the platforms versus brick and mortar. First of all, do you have shorter length stays? Is that true on the platforms? Are you seeing more shorter length stays on the platforms?
Yeah, I think off the top of my head, those are peak summer platform is like 6, I think, whereas their NAREB is going to be greater than a week, less than 2.
Okay, so it was 6. Anyway, that was the core of my question. Thanks.
Yeah. And I think, I think this information is relevant because of one of the questions we're going to talk about next, which is, and I'm going to address it second. There's 2 parts, and I figured this would be the harder one. That's a little bit more, there's more room for interpretation. So I wanted to leave this second, but I think these come back to the idea of what happens when or if we implement a 4-contract policy on new non-grandfathered listings. And so I think I'll come back to that with those 2 things in mind. And not try to unpack those and then switch gears if that's all right with everyone. Great. Any other NAREB questions before I share my screen? Great. Manish, can you enable share? Yeah. There it is. You're right on it. Great. How about this? Let me know if you all see what I see. So let me talk you through this before you try and do the math. On the last time I used a 5x5 grid, and I used a 10x10 this time, just for a little more granularity. In 19, 21, and 22, there were 1,500 arm's length transactions at $2 million or less that had a building. In other words, not land. The land transactions don't have homes; they're a little more complicated. There are sometimes subdivisions, but at the home level, the question you guys were talking about was based on one of your early values, was understanding how rentals might impact year rounders or not, or how it influences the market, how the market breaks down. And so, yeah, so let's start with this idea that 1,500 arm's length transactions, in other words, not a restructuring, not a $0 sale. This is an actual, market sale of homes at 2 million or less. And that represented 45% of all arm's length transactions on the market. So 1,500, 674, I'm sorry, 1,500 total, 1,503 exactly, and 674 of them were under a million, under 2 million, 2 million or less. So what you see is red is the 45% that are 2 million or less. The white squares that are blank on the right side are everything else. Then I broke it down. If you look at the color of the text, black text goes to a Nantucket address, and teal text goes to a non-Nantucket address. Again, we're using Nantucket address as a placeholder, but I think it's accurate enough for this the level of accuracy that this question sort of requires, because we're not working super granularly. Julia, do you have a clarification question or a thematic question?
Yeah, just a clarification. So
Yeah.
If, for example, I know that like a trust has a lot of trusts have agents, local agents, a lot of lawyers are agents. Did you assume then if it was a local agent that it was a Nantucket address? Because I know a lot of off-island, not a lot, but there's a significant number of off-island trusts that are associated or LLCs that are associated with a local lawyer, for example.
Yeah, so, a few things. One is, I think those are going to be a higher percentage of the more expensive homes as opposed to the homes in the 2 million and below. Not that they still don't exist. 2 million's still a fairly expensive asset, and plenty of people still use lawyers and trusts. But the other part is it couldn't break both ways. Would I guess that it's going to break slightly more towards the scenario you generated than otherwise? Yes, but I don't think it's going to meaningfully, if it's 10% off here, it's not going to be hugely different. These results won't be hugely different. And I looked at some of the numbers just to make sure, or some of the data points, just to make sure it wasn't like all overwhelmingly these law firm addresses. And I think there weren't so many I was concerned about whether this holds up. And if anything, what this would say is just that slightly fewer of these are black and are teal. But by and large, we'll say about 50-50, slightly more than half, maybe, yeah, I'm gonna say slightly more than half of the homes sold under 2 million went to non-island addresses. So I think your question is valid and is probably not wrong, but I don't think at the level of getting to that answer was worthwhile or going to make a worthwhile difference. And then, okay, so of the 20% of homes sold under 20% of all homes sold went to Nantucket addresses, 25% went to non. And then you see these 11 squares, which have boxes around them. These were the STRs. So 11% of homes that sold in 1920, 2022 are registered as STRs. And so, that's just we were able to connect those data sets with a very high level of accuracy. We feel pretty good about that. There's very few limitations of that data set now. So again, 11% were registered as STRs, and of those, if we take those 11 boxes and just talk about it in absolute numbers, 2 of the 11 boxes went to island addresses, and 9 of the 11 boxes went to non-island addresses. So there's a notable difference in the amount of STRs that are off-island addresses versus on-island addresses, even in the 2 million range, which is sort of what we're using as a placeholder for affordable or accessible. So, I can point to things deeper than that and try and tell you something, but I think it's fairly evident that just, homes under 2 million are splitting fairly evenly between off-island and on-island, if not slightly more off-island. But the number of those that are STRs is breaking higher towards off-island. Julia?
So you're saying over a third of the properties that have off-island addresses that have been purchased in the last 3 years are registered STRs. Obviously, we don't know if those are what level of intensity, the STR is.
Correct. That's right. Again, these are things at the level of, could we go deeper and brute force that answer? Yes, but at the time, based on the constraints of the timing of this meeting and the information that was really kind of worked in the state that we could create this answer in a couple days time, that's true. Yes.
I
without
think,
knowing
like,
intensity.
I mean, I know a lot of people on this group may question whether there's a relationship between housing and STRs, but I think that this tells you that there is definitely some pressure coming from, purchases by off-island buyers that are, have a significantly higher propensity to turn the house into some form of STR, whether it's a full-time STR or whether it's a part-time STR.
Robin?
Yeah, Matt, just to answer Julia's question, isn't it necessary to look at the trend over time? Because historically, the majority, and I think something like 75% of home sales have gone to off-island owners. So really, whether we're looking at the under 2 million mark or the above 2 million mark, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what we really need to know as to whether the problem is getting worse or getting better is the change over time.
Well, the one, I think that's relevant in understanding the dynamics of off-island and on-island buyers for homes, but you guys are focused on STRs, and the important, where I'm drilling down to here is the stuff in the top right here that's in boxes, which is, in spite of a relatively even breakdown on ownership or purchase of homes of this cost, the difference in these two groups' behavior in terms of rentals is significantly different. And that's, we could look at that over time, I suppose, but since we only have data going back to 2019 for STR rentals, that's really, I don't have a better way to do that in a hurry based on the time that we started collecting STR registration data. So it's not an answer to your question, but is
And
that?
Matt, sorry, just to name also that registrations just started in 2019, right? So
That's correct.
whether or not these homes were used as STRs in the past might not be apparent.
Yeah, yes, that's right.
So they may not be newly being used as STRs. They may have been used as STRs all along. But
these
they had to register before 2019 or 20, right?
But Stacy, what I'm looking at here are just the home, what's shown on this 10 by 10 grid is just homes that were sold in 2019 or later.
Right.
So what's on here is relevant to the period of time that we have collected data, which is why I've chosen that cutoff.
Right. No, I understand. I'm just saying, like, if somebody sold their home in 2019, they might not have previously, they might have been using it as an STR, but they never registered it with the state. Now they've sold it and it's being used as an STR. It's not actually a change in number of STRs necessarily, right? But
Yeah.
I get that it's a good starting point.
John? Excuse me, John.
Yeah, this is great, Matt. But I'm not so interested in the change over time that Robin was talking about, but I would like to see the 2022 number, because this is the here and now for on-island people that are finding it very difficult to stretch to even attainable, housing of any kind. So it is relevant the 22 number. If it's anything like this, then we do need to recognize that, I think, if we're serious about making sure our policy works for everyone, because the group of people that are finding it more and more difficult to purchase attainable housing, you can kind of see why, if this is the amount that's going to off-island STRs, under 2 million. So I don't know whether is the 2022 number significantly different to this for year one, or?
Can you name the number you're referring to? Like, do I have this sheet ready to go as 22 or?
I mean, homes below 2 million or below that are being sold to non-Nantucket addresses and are being used as STRs and after the sale, whether they were renewals or new STRs doesn't really matter if they are being used as STRs. So I guess it's that, that 9 blocks, what would that look like if we were just looking at 2022?
So let's see. So 2022 was a down year. It looked like more like before the pandemic. There's a pandemic numbers in 20 and 21 were much higher. There were 242 arm's length home sales in 242 arm's length residential home sales in 2022. 68 of those were 2 million or less. And let's see. And of those, your question is how many went to year rounders and how many did not?
Well, year rounders and became STRs.
I haven't gone, let's see, I have to unpack this. Do you want me to unpack questions live or do you guys want me to get back to you with questions later?
Later,
Okay.
for me.
Okay. I give you guys summary data. I can get to that answer fairly simply, but I don't want to make you guys listen to me think. Yeah, Julia.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
This is a lot, so I'm just finding more and more interesting data points in here. So out of the 674 homes that were sold for under $2 million,
Yep.
132 are now registered STRs and are owned by or registered with an off-island address. So
That's right.
Right. So that bucket is really, I think, the concern. So that's 20% of the total homes that were sold, whether they became year-round or non-year-round. And, you know, even if you said that a third of the 132, even if you said that, you know, 45 of those are now higher intensity STRs, that, you know, and I can think of some that were sold at pretty modest prices and could have gone to year round. I mean, I agree with John. That's the bucket we're going after.
Yeah.
I would think that inside there may be some of the year round sales in there. There may not be a significant number, but did you take out anything that was deed restricted, whether it's a covenant or
No.
Affordable housing?
On the 2 mil STR.
Well, yeah, if you
Nantucket
just looked at
address?
the 2 mil bucket, you know, you can look at sort of if it's affordable housing or covenant. Did you filter those out or are those included in here?
No, those would be in here.
It's probably not a big number, right? But you might
Yeah.
have, I don't know, 30 homes, maybe a little more with Richmond and Covenant homes that it would have sold over the last few years that would be restricted, right? That would never have gone to.
So the
an
thing,
off-island address.
the Richmond ones get complicated because at the time of their sale, they were land. So I pulled them out and then some of them slowly start coming back in. So it got to a point where I felt like I understood that it wasn't majorly off, but I didn't try to perfectly unpack those without having.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally get it. I'm just saying, you know, if anything, you've got a set of homes, maybe a few dozens
Sure.
on the year-round side that would never have become a seasonal home in the first place, right? Because they're deed restricted or whatnot. So that plays a little bit in sort of maybe, you know, over-reporting the year-round side that could have been turned into seasonal. But I think this is really interesting data, even though it's, you know, maybe not to the same minutia that we would want because we always want more, but I think this is pretty telling. So
Well, I can, you know, if you guys have specific questions, I can always go deeper. It's really hard to start with the deepest questions in the greatest detail and breadth. But if, you know, this is my starting point and, you know, what I want today is if there's exact questions that follow this that go, okay, and now I know what I need to do with this, you know, I can still get you guys that stuff. But I think the level of detail that follows this is really more interesting perhaps than it is going to point you in a direction one way or another.
Matt, just super quickly, the one thing that comes to mind is that, you know, if this is something that we came back to a little bit later, you would think that over time you'd want to update, let's say that if you think about someone who buys a house in 2022, and if their plan is to turn it into an STR, they might sit on it for a year and make some renovations and put in a pool and, you know, do whatever they need to do. And so you might not see that registered STR for a little bit of time.
Well, and if I recall right, the 2022 numbers trail because of that, right there, because the average time between purchase and STR has some tail on it, and so not all of them have come in. So the 22 numbers will be lower just because we're only we're half a year past 2022. You know, I could analyze that to figure out if it's off or if it's just we're in the trail. But yeah, I think that's.
Is there a lag in the state registration data? I mean, there's got to be, but do you know what the lag is?
I don't. I'm waiting for an update that'll give me more data, but I don't know what the reporting lag is now.
Thank you.
Yeah, Peter?
Yeah, sometimes I think that we're sniffing glue. When we talk about affordable housing, under
I
$2
know.
million.
Yeah,
You know,
I have it.
affordable, hello?
Yeah.
Oh, affordable housing, in my opinion, would be under $1 million, and even that is high. So I don't know, you know, why we think if something's $2 million, it's affordable. I mean, I specifically know a doctor at the hospital who was making $400,000 a year, and he could never afford, with this current interest rate situation, anything near $2 million. So, and let's not forget that affordable housing is not our task. And it'd be great if we can generate more affordable housing somehow, but that's not something we should be thinking about at this point.
So I think you're right. And I've kicked myself a lot of times anytime I say the number 2 million in the same sentence as affordable. I think the purpose of it is to look at not the whole housing market, because if we look at the whole housing market, we're talking about homes, you know, you guys do have in your statement something about year-round housing. So it's not your task. You're not here for affordable housing, but you have acknowledged it as relevant. And so that's why we're talking about houses on the lower half of the spectrum. If we go to, you know, I can tell you, let's see, arm's length under 2 million, there aren't that many. If you drop in recent years, if you set your condition to less than or equal to 1 million, you know, you can do that, but it's a really small number of homes of sales.
And that's probably the point. Instead of the town spending all this money on this committee, we should have probably spent that money on affordable housing committee. Because to me, that's much bigger and much more important than what we're doing.
Yeah, Jim.
Okay, thanks, Peter, for that point about affordable. Absolutely, we're talking maybe attainable at that. However, it is somewhat attainable. Look, almost half of these homes that were 2 million or less did go to Nantucket addresses. That means something. We have people that are really trying to buy these homes. Now, if 9 of those off-island address homes had not, if fewer of those had turned into STRs, there might have been more housing available for year-rounders. I don't know the answer to that. You know, none of us know exactly a one-to-one correlation. We do know we've got this draft bylaw purpose number 4, limit the conversion of residential units to short-term rentals, which have the deleterious effect of removing residential units from the available year-round housing stock. Now, Stacy's right. We don't know. Some of these were probably already STRs, but my guess is a number of them, maybe many of them were not STRs, probably many of them were not STRs. And this is very suggestive that perhaps we should try to do something to, I don't know, it's hard to come up with the right term for this, level the playing field, have more equality of outcome rather than equality of opportunity. I don't know exactly how to put this. And I just want to add one more gloss on this, which is slightly different, but it has to do with land. I've seen in the past 5 or 6 years, at least 4 plots of land in my neighborhood, which could have gone to locals trying to get an attainable house, and maybe they would have put up a 2 or 3 bedroom home and lived in it. All 4 of those have gone to 6-bedroom homes that are STRs. And I'm not trying to say the people that are doing that are evil or anything else. We've had the Wild West with no regulation. But that's not in this chart, but I see that happening in my neighborhood. And this is more graphic data because it's here. We can see it. It's in color. But these other things are happening as well. And I think we have to take this not only for what it shows, but also as an indication of a wider process. Thank you.
Thanks. So I know we have David, Julia, and Robin all to speak. I'm wondering, Matt, though, if it makes
Yeah.
sense to go through the rest of your slides and then
Yeah,
we
and
can come back and have more discussion. And like, let's just hold right now to only clarifying questions and points of discussion. Let's get to afterward, if that's okay.
yeah, and real quick, Peter, I ran your question on 19 to 22 for arm's length with homes with a building or dwelling under $1 million. There was 165 transactions. 29 of those are STRs. That's 18%. And of those 165, 103 have Nantucket addresses, and 9% of those are STRs. So I mean,
That was under $1 million?
yeah.
Oh, great. Okay,
So
that's good.
40 per year, 40 homes sold under $1 million per year, and 18% of them have become STRs. And of the ones that went to Nantucket addresses, that was 103 out of 165, and 9% became STR. So it's a similar pattern. I'm sure the numbers are slightly different, maybe even more pronounced, but yeah.
That's encouraging. Unfortunately, with interest rates and lack of inventory, it's going to change as we go forward.
Sure. Yeah. No, and that's where we leave our purview here, and that goes to the other side of affordable housing. Jim, you still have your hand up. Was that a clarification question or? Okay. So here's the next thing. I'm just have to call it to go screen grab and try to make it full size. I was looking at the for contract question because this has been the main discussion. And here's my two carve outs my two caveats before I talk about this. One, this is based on looking at what's happened over the last 4 years. Sorry, over the last 3 years when I do my averages at the bottom, because I'm not trying to predict what happens when the market changes. Like some percent of our home sales, some percent of our STRs are renting a lot peak summer, let's say more than 4 or in the upper range. All right, and half are renting below the average. We don't know how many of those homes that are renting more in the upper half are doing so because it works and it's an opportunity versus they only do because they can get that many. And I can't predict that. So I didn't try to do predictive analysis here. What I tried to do is give you guys a framework to understand what a 9 to 4 restriction might mean in changes per year moving forward. So let me just first start with the categories. Can you guys see my cursor if I point?
We can, yes.
Yeah.
So first is in teal is the sold. These are the buildings that were sold in those years that are STRs. So the first column is lapsed. In other words, I owned a home, it was an STR, I sold it, and it was not renewed or has not yet been renewed in the data that I have. The next category is new. In other words, I bought a home and I registered it as an STR for the first time in the home's existence. In other words, it's newly an STR. The third column is it's renewed. In other words, I bought it, it was an STR before, and now that I bought it, I've applied for an STR license, essentially renewing the home's STR status, which would otherwise have lapsed with a new owner in your policy. And then in orange, we go to reorganization. So these are what I'm calling the non-arm's length transactions. These are person to person within a family, or me to myself, or me changing the structure that the building is in. And new is I changed the structure and then I got an STR for the first time. I've restructured and then nothing happened and the home doesn't lapse because you guys are grandfathering in the same person. And then the third one is I reorganized and I reapplied anyways because someone's doing that for their purposes, not because of the potential things that you're doing. And so let's look at how many on average happened in the last 3 years. And I left 2019 out because it's new, and so the numbers are different because it's the new people applying to the new laws still. Julia, if you have a clarifying question.
Yeah, sorry, what does reorg mean again?
I'm saying it's a non-arm's length transfer. In other words, a $0 sale.
So it's either like a transfer from, let's say, an individual to an LLC, or is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's the
But they
simplest.
still own the
most
LLC and there
common.
was no dollars transferred. So it's a $0
right.
transfer.
Yeah, and I went, most of them are $0 and some percentage of them are far below market value. And I look back to figure out when they were built, to figure out if it was because it was sold as land. And if it was, I still compared just the land value. And if they were under a certain percentage, I want to say off the top of my head, I used 50%, then I consider it not arm's length, because typically those are within family to family transactions where they're moving money or creating some value in the movement. So it's not that there was no value transfers. You could still move $1 million and it could be non-arm's length. And I validated it with a small sampling just to make sure I understood where that line tended to be. Not perfect science, but feel fairly good about it. Yeah. So again, on average, 50 homes per year were STRs, were sold and did not renew. Again, the 22s are low for sure because of, I think, that time delay, but we're also in a market that's changing. So we don't really know. My hope is when I get an update on the data, I might get 3 more months and it might come closer or not. I don't know. The new 77 homes were sold on average that then went on and became registered for the first time. 42 were sold and then got a license again. In other words, the home used to have one and now it does. That's 42 per year. And then of the reorganizations, following a reorganization, 33 homes per year tended to, or on average, apply. 21, nothing changed, and 1 renewed for, on average, for unknown reasons. Probably to change the name on the license. And then I looked at how many additional licenses happened that year without the addition or without transfer. In other words, I own my home, I always have, and then I decided to register or I renewed for some reason. And that just rounds out the whole market. So if we look at then what would change on these, if you sold a home, you would lose 9 the market, as it were, right? So we're talking about the market as a whole, not per the individual's purview, because that's really the question here. It's about the economy as it relates to STRs, availability, and capacity. So if a home sells and it lapses, in other words, it's no longer an STR, we're losing 9 contracts per listing. And if a home sells, and then is a new contract for the first time, it will gain 4. It will go from 0 to 4. And if a home renews, essentially it was 9 on the market and now it's a 4, we've lost 5. On the reorg side, we gain 4 if it becomes a new, and the others don't make a change. And so then over the last 3 years, if we were to apply these rules, we would have lost 447 peak contracts to lapsed sales. And we don't control those. Those are lapsed regardless of our policy, but I included them to understand the market as a whole. We'd gain 309 to the 4 for new. We'd lose 208 to the renewed ones, which essentially lost from 9 to 4. We'd gain 131 contracts from reorganized, and these wouldn't change. But then with the 200 new contracts on average, 200 new registrations from non-transfers, we pick up 788. And so, what we see here is we lose a few hundred overall within the reorgs and sales. We pick up a bunch in the new, and the new is where perhaps that number comes down, but new has to drop down fairly low to break below 0. Yeah, let's start. Jim, you're waving your hand like you got a clarification question that's timely, but Dave was first. So if you're willing to defer Dave, I'll let Jim go. Go ahead, Jim.
Okay, it's just a clarification, Dave.
Yeah.
Mark, thank you, Dave. Mark, in the yellow column on the right, new or renewed, these are homes that have been owned and are still owned. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So their per listing change will not be 4, it will be 9 because they still have the right to rent 9.
I'm still not certain which, if you guys they weren't registered. So is a registered?
That doesn't matter.
So it's based on historic ownership, not based on.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
well,
that will
will
5 times 197 more rooms than you have. Yeah.
Yes, no contracts. So that would add 1,000 contracts per se.
Yeah.
So bringing our additional contract number up to 1,500, let's say. Yeah.
And my clarification is going to skew it the other way.
Yep.
I think I'm not sure 2019 belongs in there because that was a registration year, and clearly with that amount of registrations in a year on the no transfer, right?
It's not being counted.
It's not being. This is not the 11.5 not 8 11,158 on the new renewed.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. What
That-
about it?
That would suggest that that is the beginning of the registration process.
That's correct. But this down here, when I use this 197, it's an average of 22, 21,
Okay.
and 20.
Perfect. That's, I mean, it looked that way, but I just wanted to confirm that. Okay,
That's
great.
correct.
Thank you.
Yep. Jim, do you have another question? Oh,
So I think,
Um,
Matt, if you then made this a 9 in the yellow instead of a 4, right? I think it just makes your point stronger that if your point is that there is reason to believe that you are not, that this policy is not going to dramatically reduce the available contracts. Is that your point?
yes. There.
Okay.
Yeah, and so, this isn't perfect. It's a framework. I wanted to make sure you guys see how I'm thinking about measuring this problem. And in addition to how I'm measuring it, that you understand, that you let me know if you agree or not of how to think about changes to contracts, which is the thing that impacts the economy. And then at the beginning, I carved out the two pieces that we don't control, which are how is this limitation going to change it? And I would say eventually it will taper off, right? Eventually, if the trend goes up, it tapers off because more homes are STRs. And eventually, if enough homes are STRs, there's fewer that will transfer, and there's maybe an oversaturated market. But I think the point at which that happens is further up and out, far enough out that you guys want to understand that, because you're putting forward a policy with the intention of limiting the property as an investment. And I think we don't know to what degree it will have that impact or not relative to how many contracts change per year. Yeah, Robin.
Thanks, Matt.
Yep.
What concerns me about this is just, for one, I'm finding this convoluted to fully digest and analyze.
Sure.
But
Mhm.
if I take a snapshot, you have, this is a snapshot in time, and I think you drew us to the 20 to 22 average.
Mhm.
And from there, we have a 50 that are sold and 77 which are new or are sold lapse versus sold new,
Yep.
which is more than 50% jump in sales outweighing those that were lost. So what concerns me about this is that we are supposed to say disregard. I think what we're saying here is disregard the pain that may be felt by the individual.
Do you mean what I'm saying in the numbers, or what you guys as a group?
Yeah, in the
would be
numbers. I mean,
saying
I'm
the
just trying to
policy?
draw conclusions from your
Yeah.
numbers. You're giving a macroeconomic view, and you are saying take comfort from this because the economy will not suffer that much by my analytics. My concern is that this is showing a snapshot in time where the sold and the lost license and the sold and the new licenses is basically a ratio. You got 77 versus 50, so you've got like 55% more in the sold new column. And is that sustainable? Or if you're doing a macroeconomic analysis, is that sustainable year in and year out to say, take comfort, don't worry, individuals may be hurt by the 4 versus 9 policy, but the economy will be fine.
So I want to start by, I'm not doing economics here. I'm telling you changes that happened in the last 3 years and applying your rules. That's a leap. I want to be careful.
I get it, but
Yeah.
I'm purely going on the statistical analysis. My concern is that this differential between sold new and sold lapse may not be sustainable over time. therefore may not be a picture that you can take comfort from in the long term. That's all I'm saying from a statistical perspective, ratio based.
And I think to me, those are the, the solds are the ones that will likely change the most with the market. Those are the ones that you guys are building policies to impact positively or negatively the most. So it doesn't surprise me that that is where you feel there's the most uncertainty. I would agree. But I would add that there's also the no transfer addition. So if we're talking about how will it impact the overall capacity of contracts peak summer, you'd have to include yellow, as opposed to teal, which is specifically around the market of someone who's buying a new home. And I think that's a very different discussion around how will it impact home buyers who want to STR, as opposed to what the question I'm seeking to answer here, which is how will it impact the island's capacity for short-term rentals in the peak season? And I could look into the former question, but that's not what I'm intending to state, that this won't impact the sale market, the purchase of people who are looking to buy a home to STR. I'm sure it will impact them. You're adding restrictions to them, but that's not what I'm trying to say here. I'm trying to say that the overall capacity of the island, STRs in the peak summer, I don't believe is immediately at risk in the way that there have been discussions about.
Great.
Does that clarify? And I'm not discounting what you're saying. That's not really what I'm intending to say with this.
Yeah, I thank you, Matt. I mean, you were asking me. I would need to do much. I basically disagree with the conclusion.
Okay.
And I would have to, I think this is I apologize. I think this is a convoluted way to get to it. I'm trying to understand the methodology. I disagree with the conclusion, but I appreciate what you're presenting. And I and many others feel it's more dire than the comfort that you're saying this presents.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in here, right? Like, this is what will happen in the future is we cannot predict. There can be no data. Robin, you have reasons to have concerns about what particular, how decisions this group might make might impact people's decision-making and capacities in the future to afford and invest in short-term rental. And we as a group, we do not have any data that can prove that one way or the other about what will happen in the future. This is only a look at the past, right? And if we were to analyze this, given what has happened in the past, we all know that what happens in the future is not solely determined by what happened in the past, right? Or it's not going to necessarily be consistent. So there is uncertainty, right, about the future. And all we can do with our data is try to understand the information that is currently available to us. And then people can have their own reasons and assumptions and rationale for believing certain other things will happen in the future. So, Karen?
So I'm trying to clarify a little bit more about the reorg one. So these are people who might have just started an LLC, and so it was a zero transfer. I'm wondering if this is also though where like some of the inherited properties could show up. And I'm wondering, so I think I had understood that we were putting this measure on maybe just for properties that were sold. Are we saying that we might be doing it for other kinds of transfers as well? And that's maybe for the larger group, or maybe I'm misunderstanding the lever. I just want to make sure
So what you're asking, Karen, is would this 4 go to a 9?
That should probably be 9 as well.
Okay.
Yep.
Would you guys like me to keep making these changes live?
No, I think that's a helpful clarification. Thanks, Karen.
Yeah.
But we'll make those changes before we post these for the public.
Yeah.
David?
thank you.
Yeah, just a couple things. I mean, I think that this clearly shows a trend in 3 years, and I don't think any of us believe that trend couldn't change, because it could. And in my mind, I think that this is going to be a maintenance situation. We every year are going to have to revisit the numbers, and every year we're going to have better numbers through the town registration process. So I'm comfortable with these, but I'm not saying these trends are set in stone either. And then just and one concern for me is, and maybe Robin could respond, is when he says it's going to cause pain. I'm not sure how you come to that conclusion when the 4-week people are new buyers and they know what they're buying. So, and they know the rules. So if pain is caused to them by these rules, that is through their miscalculation, not through us creating a lever that changes how they can rent their house. They haven't bought their house yet. So I don't necessarily agree with the pain comment.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
Thanks, Dave. So Matt, just checking in, is there more you want to share, or are we done with slides?
No, that's what I wanted to share.
Okay, so if you want to pull that down.
Yeah.
And then I do want to just open then to, if there's further discussion people want to have about these particular data points, and then from there we can really shift over to discussing the packages in more detail. Robin?
Yeah, just very quickly in response to Dave. It's on a few different levels, and it's just based on feedback that we've had from really from people who operate STRs, both year-rounders and part-time residents. So the pain is on a couple levels. One is that the concern is just purely on a this isn't the focus of this group, but on the sales level, whether you're a year-rounder or a part-time resident, this will depress prices, property prices, because it will limit the possibility to use that as it's to have 9 rentals in July, August, as it's historically been done. So whether you're a year-rounder or you are a part-time owner, the market is the market. Majority of the market, majority of demand is from off-islanders, and so there's a concern there. The second concern is the overall tourist housing stock on island. Now, I need to look more at Matt's numbers, but Matt is saying because there's an increase, basically, I think the conclusion is in that short window, the increase in new STRs, the rapid increase, which is greater than those that have been sold, will compensate for bedrooms on island. So our concern is if that, and I take on board what Stacy said, this is just a snapshot in time, but this is, if you extrapolate this into the future, this gives comfort if this jump in STRs continues versus those that stop being STRs that are sold or lapsed, that will present enough bedrooms so it won't affect the economy on the island. I disagree with that. I think that you can't go from a 9 limit, which overwhelmingly people say is one or a weekly rental in July and August, and reduce that to 4 without economic pain on the island. But I haven't done the full statistical analysis, but that's just the feedback we are getting from those that we speak to, both year-rounders and part-timers who conduct STRs.
Robin, can I unpack that question a little bit to help see if I can inform this better? So when you talk about 9 to 4 for new home buyers, right? Like that will slow down the market, but slowing acceleration and slowing growth and negative growth are different. And so like I've been in meetings where people will address growth slowing down, and like that's acceleration, and that's very different than will there be fewer STRs or rooms because of this? I don't see any reason to believe there's going to be fewer STRs. It will slow down the growth, but I think that's what you guys, well, at least many of you guys are intending to do with this policy, is to limit the number of STRs that are purchased as investments, which is why you're picking a lower limit of 4. But when you introduce, and I don't mean to pick on the words, but words matter. When you speak to paying for the island, that's why I'm talking about the whole island's capacity for STRs, because I think that is the island's question. And I don't see a scenario in any short time where we've lost so many STRs that have sold and flipped or been lost that we're now down rooms relative to, you know, any baseline. You know, the individual will experience a change in the market, but I think applying the individual's experience with the island's capacity for rooms are very different measures. And that's what I'm trying to show here, is the island's capacity for rooms, which I don't think is going to fall below a number that we're currently at, or we're at even a couple of years ago anytime soon.
I mean, and just to name also, the data did show that there are a very large number of STRs that are not doing, you know, 9 contracts, that could do 9 contracts, right? So should the market be so depressed that it would be valuable for people to enter in, or at a higher level, you might also see, right? You can't really predict. There's lots of different variables that might affect that future state. Julia.
Thanks, Stacy. Yeah, this is really interesting stuff when you layered it on top of the NARAB too. I think one of the things that Matt, you just referred to that's critical, and I appreciate you like clarifying the slowing of growth. I mean, I think you had on average 300 additional STRs every year that are coming online, some 299 or something. You know?
By registration, I think that's the number, yeah.
Right, well, that's our proxy, right? And that's a big number. So obviously that's a concern in terms of the capacity of the island and whatnot. I mean, we already know this is tremendous pressure on housing. What I think is the bigger issue that Robin was talking about is, you know, sort of someone being worried about the value of their home if it can't be rented to the same degree. Well, I think the flip side of that is that we have a housing crisis on the island, and I totally agree that we're not talking about affordable housing here. We're talking about attainable housing. And if someone who is willing to spend, you know, twice as much on a property because they're going to turn it into a full-time STR, then someone who just, you know, works on the island and lives there and can't STR the whole property, maybe can rent a little bit on the side or can't at all. That's one of the reasons that the house prices are so out of control. And I know it's people are benefiting from it, but the community is in a huge crisis. And I think that's not something that I'm inventing. That's something that is happening. The town is literally at a halt in terms of being able to, you know, hire people to do work. I mean, so I know I may be a minority on this group in terms of wanting to make sure that the policies do not allow every home on the island to be full-time STRs. And I'm concerned that we're talking about 9 and 4, but at the end of the day, all of these properties will have the ability to be full-time STRs, whether they want to rent for two weeks at clip in the summertime and rent for smaller, shorter stays the rest of the year. And at the flip side is like the other piece of this is the NARAB data, which is really interesting, which Stacy, you mentioned. Like, I mean, I just ran some really quick numbers, but it's 60% of NARAB's contracts, of NARAB's properties, rent for 6 weeks or less per year. That to me is not a full-time STR. That's an accessory use. And we want to encourage that in a sense of protecting that as a tradition. If you want to go a little bit further, 75% of NARAB's properties rent for 7.5 weeks or less out of the year. I mean, it's really significant. And I feel like this group is trying to protect the minority that is like okay, 6% of NARAB's properties rent for 12 weeks or more out of the year. 6%. And that's who we're protecting. So that's how I feel.
Thanks, Julia. John?
Yeah, I'd just like to respond to Robin's, comment about pain, whether that's house prices or whatever that pay may be. Just to state the obvious, every 12 months, we have an opportunity at town meeting to change any one of these. And if anything we do causes the island economy to negatively impact, then, I think we can expect the voters to make the necessary course correction. So, maybe there'll be pain. How much? None of us know. How little? None of us know. But whatever it is, we have a chance to adjust. And that's why, I think having it in the general bylaw, it's a good thing. All we need is 51% and it can be changed. So I don't worry too much about pain that is not really fully defined or knowable at this point. Thank you.
And John, if I can add to that for a second, I meant to mention these during our debrief of the public meeting, because these were actually the comments shared with me by the Board of Health. One of the things that they mentioned was that this group should clarify for Granicus and for the Board of Health, who is contracting with Granicus, what it is you would like them to collect by way of documentation from the registrations, both for purposes of enforcement, but also for purposes of ongoing analysis of how well are these policies in practice meeting the group's objectives, meeting the town's objectives, right? So this group could spend a little more time really detailing out, these are things we want to make sure that are being asked for by the registration process, so that a future committee or maybe the select board, or the Board of Health, can go and crunch some numbers and see, okay, let's see what these impacts are and have been on the issues that we care most about here, right? So, so just to name that, that's something the group should sort of keep in mind, and that doesn't necessarily have to be done before this gets printed into the warrant. So, all right. So at this point, I know we have 3 more people to speak. Why don't I'm going to have you guys speak, and then just as a flag post here, I want to just say a little something about what consensus means, kind of remind you all, and then sort of walk through how I would like to talk through the rest of the meeting. So, Peter. You're muted, Peter.
Sorry. What Julia said about the long-term rentals not being such a small part of the rental system, yeah, I agree. We need more of them, but I don't necessarily think people that do long-term renting in this island go through agents. I think a lot of it is because somebody whispered something in someone's ear and they heard that there was an availability. People don't have to list long-term rentals in this island. There's such a demand for it. So I disagree with her on that.
I didn't say anything about long-term rentals, Peter. I'm not sure what you're referring to.
And more than 6 weeks.
I was talking about the percentage of properties that NARAB lists that have a total number of days. Instead of using number of days rented as a short-term rental, I was using weeks because I think people can relate more easily. So they have to be rent for a total of 6 weeks. So it has nothing to do with long-term rentals.
Okay, fine. Secondarily, we don't talk about the grandfathering when Robin's talking about his concern. Everybody that is renting now is going to continue to rent. It's only when they sell the house or move or whatever that things are going to change. So the concern, it's gonna take a long time for the concern to be there. I don't necessarily agree. I don't think we really know the numbers, to be honest with you, because the past 3 years have been so misleading based on what's happened in the economy. So I don't necessarily think it's as big a problem as you might think, Robin. The last thing is, we've talked about it before and we haven't brought it back up again, is the path to the short-term, to off-island owners to be able to rent more contracts. And, maybe, I'll suggest to you that we say 5 years. After 5 years, you're up to 9. Do we have it going up on a sliding scale from 1 to 2 to 3? I don't know. But maybe at the end of 5 years, if you've been on this island and you've had 4 contracts, you'll be able to go to 9 contracts and be as the same as everybody else. We talked about that at our last meeting, and I think we had, pretty good conversation, and many people thought it was a way to go. So that's it. I'm done.
Okay, and I think you're getting to where we want to go, which is if people, when we get there, right, if there are things about the existing package that you would want to see change that would increase your support, but that are still responsive to what you've been hearing are the concerns that others are bringing forth. So we will get to that in a minute, and I will hold, Peter, your suggestion for that. William?
Thank you. When I hear this discussion about 9 versus 5 and making distinctions among different classes of residents and so forth, I think back to the beginning of our discussions last fall. It was pretty clear that we had a commitment to equality, that treating residents and non-residents equally. And that should still be the case. And we've got our advisory committee of non-voting taxpayers that makes a substantial contribution to the economy of the island. And we've always felt that we should be treated equally in major respects. And there's a wave coming here that suggests that not everyone feels that way. And I can tell you that we are never going to reach a consensus in this group if those distinctions are going to be made. We don't feel that there's been any reasonably sound evidence that's been developed that suggests that we're going to adversely impact affordable housing by anything we do. We certainly support affordable housing, and we feel the pain of the island, so to speak. But the way to deal with that is dealing with short-term rentals. However we do it, we can treat the non-residents equally. And I'd like us to focus on that.
Yeah. Okay. So again, we're now getting into the proposals thing. So Jim is yours in response to this, to one of the proposals or your ideas for proposals. Okay. And Dave? Okay. So can I ask you guys to hold that for 1 second?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I want to pull up for you just a reminder of what consensus, how decision-making is happening for this group and what consensus means. Our decision-making, this is our operating protocols, that the group will operate by consensus, which is defined as the unanimous concurrence of the primary members, or in the absence of a primary, his or her alternate. Members may also abstain or stand aside, which means you're not consenting or endorsing, but you also are not blocking. So abstentions will not count toward consensus or against consensus, right? But to take this the next step, if you disagree with a proposal, if this package is unacceptable to you, and we're not going to get to that level today, but before we finish, we will, right? If you cannot live with this package, you need to make offers of alternatives that are satisfactory to others. You need to try to figure out what could we change in this package that would make it at least minimally acceptable to me while also remaining acceptable to the others in the group, right? So we are trying to find overall a package where you will not each love every piece of this package, right? In fact, there may be parts of the package you really don't like. There may be a policy in the package that you don't like. But the package as a whole is sufficiently, it has at least enough that you do like or that you can live with, that you are able to support the package as a whole, right? So that is what we are seeking, right? In terms of consensus, right? Not that every provision in here is great for you and you love it, right? But that as a whole, this package, and remembering our goals, right? Our goals of protecting the traditional ways of using homes as short-term rentals on Nantucket, not hurting the local economy from too quick or too rapid or too extensive of a loss of short-term rentals, prohibiting corporate and trying to limit, I think, the business use of houses exclusively as rentals, limiting conversion of residential units, that is losing housing that could be serving as housing, particularly for year-round people, and creating a structure that reduces the threat of litigation and challenge for people who are operating short-term rentals, right? So those are our goals. If you want to change these goals, you should say so as well, right? Because these are the goals that our set of policies is trying to meet. All right. So I just wanted to put that up to remind you all what we're trying to achieve here. So now we have the set of provisions that the group had been considering. I guess I could have just kept this thing up for a minute, right? As a reminder. What I want to do now is, as we discuss, to hear if there are pieces of this policy that you are particularly concerned about, or that you think we could do better as a group about, to raise those and what suggestions you might have for those. So for example, so far we have heard, just in the last, 10 minutes, we heard a proposal that maybe we add a sunset to the 4-time change limit. And that sunset proposed was 5 years, so that after 5 years, that changes, goes back up to 9. That was one suggestion we just heard. The other suggestion we just heard, I think from William, was eliminate the tax exempt version of this. That is, make it so that it's 4 times for everybody, not making a limit for a change for tax exempt residents, those who are exempt from the residential exemption, right? So those are the 2 proposals we heard.
Or make it 9 for everyone.
Or make it 9 for everyone.
Yeah.
Right. But are you, William, you could live with either of those as long as it's equal?
I'd have to talk to Peter about that.
Okay.
Take it under
Because I think
advisement.
we want to be clear whether your concern is equality or whether your concern is 4. Right.
No, a concern is equality. Absolutely.
So
Not the pure number.
right. Okay. So good to
Okay.
know. So with that in mind, I want to open it for discussion, and again, this is just the general bylaws. We also have the zoning that people might want to discuss or offer changes for. And you may also at this moment want to say why you think this package is the best balance. So that is also within scope for the moment. So with that, Jim, I will turn to you.
Thank you, Stacy. That was really well said. I do want to address the general package and the 9 to 4, but first I just want to quickly touch base with Julia and with William. And Julia, I just want to say, I think we really agree on a lot more than you may think we do. I just want you to know that like the 6 weeks or less a year, that's 60% of NARAB, and how that is so interesting. That's the sort of behavior we're trying to encourage in the future through sales when they can only rent 4 contracts, which could well be 6 weeks or so. And so what I'm saying is, yes, I don't believe that the zoning should go to accessory because I'm worried about number 5, which is the regulatory structure that reduces the threat of lawsuits. But I think a lot of us are trying to get to one of the same places that you are, which is limit future growth. And I hope you'll understand, I really do mean that sincerely, that we are a lot in the same place with you. It's just a different way of going about it. Now, back to William's point, I know it's not one of our top 5 bylaw purposes. We have talked about equality. I understand where you're coming from, William. Where I don't agree with you is when we look at data such as what Matt showed us, and we see when there are no regulations, the way 9 out of the 25 of off-island new purchases become STRs, and only 2 out of the on-island, there doesn't seem to be equality of outcome. And I think having the exemption may help with that. But let's go back a step. The real reason why we're proposing limiting contracts to 4 times during high season after a sale, the real reason for that is to try to discourage investor-only STRs. That's something a lot of us believe about sincerely. We feel that's a way to do it in a way that will make it difficult for investor-only people to make it work. And yet, with seasonal people, it may still work. I was talking to a friend who's a seasonal owner, and he said, well, I only rent 4 or 5 weeks anyway during the summer because my family's there. We're seasonal residents. We want to be there. It may seem unequal to you. I understand that. And I'm sorry about that. We're not trying to do that, but it's the only way that we can see that could be a valid way to limit or possibly even get rid of most of new investment-only STRs. We think it can work. The exemption, I realize that goes against equality, but when you look at the unequal playing field that we saw in Matt's data, sometimes I think one type of equality of outcome has to overcome the other type of equality. Or as I said last week, sometimes fairness has to be the main issue. So I do want to say just for a minute, Stacy, that I think this is a very good package overall. I think it gets us toward the middle in a lot of ways, but also does a lot of important things. It prohibits corporations. I know there can be some slippage through that, going through the cracks, but I think it will do it for the most part because it has to be proven at registration. It will limit 1 license per person. And yes, that will be 2 for a married couple, 3 with a family, but still, I think that's significant. The limiting to 9 times can help with churn, 9 times in high season. And the other features, I think together it creates a package. And one of the most important ones we cannot forget is the grandfathering. We have to treat people fairly who set up their finances with the ability to do this. So I know I've said a lot of different things, but basically I'm saying the 9 to 4 will help with investor-only STRs, and maybe we have to try to level the playing field between for those year-rounders who simply cannot find housing. Thank you.
Am I up, Stacy? Jim said so many good things. I agree with them all, especially as it relates to Julia. I do believe if we can, that we're way closer than it appears. I would just like to kind of dig into Mr. Gardner's concern about equality and what it's based in, so that we can figure out how we can come to an agreement. And I just want to know, is the concern about the 4 weeks, is the concern about the carve out for locals? Because I really strongly believe if we look at the playing field as it would be with these levers that we're talking about, when we look at grandfathering favors the non-voting taxpayers well beyond more than it favors the local people. And I don't want to get into this side and that side, but I think that is very fair for everybody. The people that live here year round struggle with housing. And if we can carve out to help a small amount of people, and I'd like to ask Matt if he could share that number with us, but I think over 3 years, it's less than 70 people that we're looking to help. I think that it's our responsibility to do so. On a political side, those are the people that are going to be voting for this package at town meeting, and we can't forget that. But more on the moral side, it's our responsibility to help year-round residents have safe and secure housing. And I strongly believe that this carve-out will do that. If the non-voting taxpayers or other people do not agree with that, I would offer that there might be a way around that, or there might be a different lever we could use. But I guess I need to understand whether it's the carve out or it's the 4 weeks. Jim addressed the 4 weeks very well. It is directly aimed at the investor-owned property, the property that someone buys, has no intention of living in, and rents as much as they possibly can. And I think that everybody agrees that that is something we want to manage on many levels. I mean, I think it bends the curve on attainable housing, maybe not much, but I don't think anything here we do will fix affordable or attainable housing, but we'll bend the curve in that way. So I fully support this package, but am willing to talk about tweaks, but I think we need to be careful. Thank you.
Robin?
So I agree a lot with what people are saying, and it's interesting because I don't attend these meetings as the main seat holder very much. It's usually Kathy who does that very well for us. But the last time I did, I brought up the whole issue of attainable housing, and that it's something that we really need to address and focus on, not just affordable housing. And there was some debate and question as to whether that should be our goal or not. But we, Kathy, I, many of the other people who operate STRs fully see that. But we also see it not as uniquely a Nantucket issue. It is nationwide, and it is aggravated in resort communities, whether they are ski communities, whether they are in Florida, wherever it is. That doesn't mean we don't have to address it, but it's not just Nantucket, it's not just STRs, but we support moving towards that goal. The other interesting thing, which we really haven't addressed, is what was raised earlier in Matt's slide. The whole issue of attainable housing are the sales that are under a certain price point. Whether that's 2 million, whether that's 1.5 million, there is nothing that we have in our policies yet that really is laser focused on that sector, on attainable housing and ways to slow or seriously impede that. So I just want to put that out there, but I want to talk specifically to some of the policy proposals and just a couple of tweaks that I think might be needed. One is the language in the very first one, only one dwelling unit as a short-term rental. We've had a huge number of questions that say, well, wait a second, I might build a guest house or an ancillary unit on my lot. And this is something Nantucket is trying to encourage, to have more housing for whether it's workers or whatever. And shouldn't this be phrased as an owner may register to operate dwellings solely on one lot, or some other definition, not one dwelling, because there are a lot of people who do have guest houses. Some are garages, which are converted, some are one bedroom, but shouldn't it be one lot, not one dwelling, which causes a lot of confusion. The other point I want to jump to, the limited to 4 weeks per year. And, I differ with many. July and August is the only sure thing in the Nantucket calendar. Not just for STR operators, but for restaurant operators, hotels, people who are, July and August is when you're sure that you can be booked. Everything else is a roll of the dice. So that is why, we are really focused on this. So sunset, again, Kathy is the principal voter. She has the final call on this, but a sunset provision is something that we may be able to get to. We agree. We don't want full investor types buying up Nantucket housing stock. Agreed. But there is a question of harm here. I am still concerned about harm, not just for the individual owner, but for the island. And if there were a sunset, I think if it were 3 years, maybe that's something somewhere we could go to. So in the interest of compromise, putting something forward, maybe 3 years. The other thing is that we are really only focusing on sticks. There are two ways to go about this. One are sticks, the other is carrots. So for example, what we haven't talked about, I don't want to go down new rabbit holes in the 11th hour, but what about the town has just secured $6.5 million in annual funding and a potential 3% community impact fee. What about the possibility of using some of that money, especially focused on lower priced STRs, to create some type of fund to incentivize housing for workers and year-rounders? That you make a pitch and you say, okay, you operate an STR, but Nantucket through these funds may be willing to pay X if you offer your home to a year-rounder or some way to provide worker housing. So those are carrots that we haven't considered. The final point that I want to make is, the other point I was going to say is that, isn't it possible that if we have some differences of opinion, that these could be separated out? Because our fear is that some of these, like the limited to 4 weeks per year, there may be more people who are voters who are concerned with this and actually vote it down. They vote the whole package down because this is proposed. I hear many here are advocates of that policy, but we are hearing something different. So could this be spun out? Because this is a very new lever introduced only a few weeks ago and put into a separate policy that is voted on distinctly from the whole package. So those are my principal rules, my principal thoughts. The other concern I have, the final concern I wanted to make, is that I don't see any connection between reducing contracts from 9 to 4 in July and August and providing more housing for workers or Nantucketers. Putting the brakes on the market, yes. Causing some pain, to John's point, yes, but I don't really see any direct connection between that lever and providing more housing. Thank you.
Robin, sorry, if I could just because I think we heard Jim say very specifically his perception of the purpose of that lever is to remove the investor-only STRs from that market of who is competing for the house, with the hopes that that will give an upper hand, or a little bit at least bend the curve, as he said, toward the potential for more year-round people to get that house. So that is, if that house is not appealing to an investor who only wants to use it for short-term rentals, those investors tend to have deeper pockets. So just removing that piece of the competition, that Jim, if I am saying that correctly, I believe was your case for the connection between those things. If I'm getting that right.
Tracy, I take that on board. I just feel that that is a better target, or achievable, if it's focused on the attainable part of the market, not, for example, a $6.5 million house on Yield Point. So I hear what you're saying.
Yeah. And I did want to follow up with that piece of your question, because you did start by saying that, you know, maybe we should have a lever that is focusing specifically on the attainable housing piece of the market. So I do want to put that out to people. If it's worth thinking about a lever that is specifically focused at a price point, at a percent of, you know, the average, at whatever it is you think, if people wanted to consider that as an option, you know, just taking that, Robin, from your suggestion. Karen, does it help to keep this up, or should I take it down?
Keep it up would be great.
Okay. All right, will do. Go ahead, Karen.
So it's been fascinating how my thinking evolves on this, and has even evolved tonight over time. One of the things I did in the last week is I had that idea about kind of case studies and scenarios and how all of these things would play out. And I did it for myself, my own, kind of trying to work through these different levers and how it would apply to families in different situations. And it was really interesting. So kind of thinking through, like, okay, what happens to a family who's trying to buy a new house, and, you know, and these different things. I shared it with Stacy, and I think she was maybe going to see if John could check my work and see if I was interpreting things. And of course, if it might change tonight even, but that was very useful. And so maybe that could be helpful. But in thinking through some of these things, you know, there are a lot of ideas that I think are really promising here overall. I have a couple of tweaks. I agree with Robin I have a problem with the only one dwelling unit, because I do think that there are lots of situations. I think Matt had said, we can't get too much in the weeds and all the different exceptions with things, but this is one where I kept coming up with examples of times that I could see it impacting people, where they have two dwelling units on one property, And so they might have the garage apartment, they might have a guest house. And, you know, Stacy, you mentioned the idea was last in the planning board meeting, the idea is if you live in one house, then the other one must be an investment. And I think that actually a lot of families use two houses on one property for extended family vacationing. And then when they're not using it, they would like to be able to rent both out separately. I just think it creates a lot of limitation for many people that you can't say, like, for example, a year-round resident might be wanting to rent their primary while they're on vacation for 3-4 weeks, whatever, maybe. And then, you know, they have the garage apartment that they'd also like to be able to rent. So I just think that it would be great if we could tweak that language a little bit to either property or lot, but, you know, one per, but one lot or one property per owner. And to clarify, I also think that the way John seemed to be really defining it is he's saying an LLC, if an LLC is the owner of the property, then the LLC can only have one STR, I believe. So it's not as easy as saying, oh, well, this one's assigned to the wife and a couple, and this one's the husband and the couple, so they can have two. I'm not sure it's that easy. So, but my biggest point is I think we really should tweak it so that it's one property and it could be limited to up to two. I think that's potentially reasonable to consider it that way. Let's see. That I go a little bit back and forth. I hear both the arguments about equality, and I hear about the really wanting to limit the investor STRs, and wanting to help year-round residents. I just had a thought. I wondered if we're not thinking that most people are renting all that many weeks anytime anyway, and if we think that year-round residents, many of them, unless they're connected to the school system or something, probably are here during the summer working and doing things. Do we need to have a blanket carve out for that they could have the 9, or could it be some kind of other exemption process if they needed to have 9 or they were able to have 9? I just wondered if that was a workaround that maybe we could deal with. I'm not ruling out.
Just to be clear, Karen, you're suggesting that instead of having the exemption for residents to be able to have to have 9, that the 4 applies to everybody, and that they would go through the hardship exception. For example, if they, the teachers who need to do this because they're gone for the summer, was that your suggestion?
Yeah, or maybe not even it has to be a hardship so much, but that they could rent because they're a teacher. So, we could, maybe is that a way to let them rent because they're gone for 9 weeks. And so, that's the choice they've been making, is to be off island all summer, something like that. But yes, it's kind of the idea. I wondered if we could toss that around a little bit. So it just occurred to me too, so I haven't really thought it through. And I do think there should be some kind of sunset clause, because as I was working on my little scenarios, I had all these ones where I was like, well, in perpetuity, they can only have 4. And that seemed like a long time for some families who might say be purchasing a retirement home and they're going to work, keep it for 20 years and they want to retire to it, but they still are always limited to the 4. So I thought there should be some kind of sunset. So that's
all right. Thank you.
Real quick, I have a data point on multi, if that's helpful.
Go ahead, Matt.
It looks like rentals that are registered on properties with multiple dwellings rent just about the same rate, 25 to 24%. So I don't think it's like a differentiation, like lots with multiple dwellings are being used differently. It's just that at equal rates, they tend to have an STR on them. This is what I see quickly. It's not a perfect answer, but generally I would say account for them, because a quarter of homes have multiple dwellings, but I don't think they don't seem to be special in the way that they're rented.
Can I just add my, one other thought I had about that one is it's not so different to think about, you know, an 8 or 7 or 8 room property being rented versus 2 smaller properties that have 3 rooms on the same property. Dwelling units, sorry, I'm getting,
Yeah.
if you have, that was just a smaller point. But
Yeah, okay. Just to reiterate, I think some of the suggestions now we've heard, right? We heard sunset the 4 to go back up to 9, whether it's 5 years. We've heard a suggestion of 5 years and a suggestion of 3 years. We've heard eliminate the tax exemption, the residential exemption to allow 4, and you know, allow residents to go in front of the whatever the board is that is gonna hear hardship or you know, unique cases, and describe it that way. And then we heard up to 2 dwellings on 1 lot rather than just 1 dwelling. And then Robin also put forward some other concepts like some carrots or some focus specifically on houses at the, you know, 2 million or, you know, less kind of level to have specific elements focusing on that. And I think Robin also suggested 4 times, putting the 4 times as a separate thing to vote on. So I just want to make sure I'm capturing everybody's suggestions for new things. I did also want to say the other things I heard were that we might want to add to our purpose. We have that we're prohibiting corporations in there, but I don't think we specifically say anything about investor-only short-term rentals, and maybe we want to explicitly say in our purposes that we are trying to discourage investor-only STRs or full-time STRs. We might want to say that specifically. I think we don't have anything specifically in here on churn, and we might want to name that, even though primarily, yeah, that is part of what the group's trying to do. So I think we might want to specifically put churn in there. And then the other one I thought might be helpful to name explicitly. We have avoiding adverse impacts on the economy from losing existing short-term rental revenue. But I do think the group, and Jim, you specifically have been talking about really trying to avoid changing the rules on people who have planned their lives around the rules as they currently exist. That is, I think the proposals you all have in here and the way that you've structured them, one of your purposes is to minimize pain to people who have invested or made decisions about the properties on Nantucket under one set of rules, only to have sort of, you know, the rules changed midway that could potentially lead to dramatically harmful, you know, things for them. Right. And I don't have quite the right wording here, but I could work on that if people agree that those, that we should, you know, try to add those 3 things in some way to our purposes. I see Jim nodding and Tom thumbs up. So if you don't agree with that when as you are speaking, feel free to share those thoughts as well. Okay, I will ask if you want to speak to one of the policy suggestions someone else has made in terms of, you know, yes, I support that, trying to do that in as concise a way as you can, so we can, because I see we have a lot of hands up. So, Peter.
You know, we keep coming back and forth to this attainable housing situation. And It's not our, I keep saying, it's not our mandate. We haven't studied it. We don't have any research on it. We really don't have the right to get involved in that at this point. Again, I wish we did. And you know, it would be great if the town did something, and they're planning on doing something. There's a lot of groups that are being formed to really directly impact it, similar to what we're doing with the short-term rentals. So let's just do our job and do it right and not muddy the waters with bringing that into this. Secondarily, I think what you mentioned about people that had planned for the future, et cetera, on Nantucket, putting that into the bylaw purposes, I think number one really does that. I don't know that we really, maybe we can add a couple of words to it, but I don't think we need to add a new purpose for that. And the last thing I want to say is, you know, hardships are embarrassing. You know, it's like saying to people, if you're using the food pantry, you have to go and get permission from the town hall. I mean, it's wrong. And we should have a way to approve things without making it a hardship and having to go in front of a board. That is just wrong and embarrassing to people. That's it.
Thanks, Peter. And I am, yeah, okay, go ahead. Tom.
Yeah, just jotted down a couple notes here in no certain order, and not to jump on anybody's comments at all. To William's point about equality as far as as far as off-islanders or summer folks, or however you want to make the definition, versus islanders. I think when we started out in the beginning, we actually, I know this, we very much didn't want to do what the New Orleans case was all about in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which was New Orleans basically said that only folks who lived in the city could do STRs, and that was shot down under equal protection by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And to me, this is what this option that we're thinking of between the 9 and the 4 is certainly not that at all, because I know that Mr. Giorgio would have flagged that already. And to me, this is what Jim and Dave and others have said before, is bending the curve to away from investor-owned STRs towards it being a more level playing field. And then to Robin's comment on affordable housing, attainable housing, I agree with what Peter just said and others about that is not, I mean, as the affordable housing advocate on the work group, there are only so many things that we can do here to promote that. And I wish there were an easy carrot and stick. You know, it's not like we're dividing up a piece of land here and I'm fighting for the most or whatever. I can tell you as a new select board member that we talked about this at our governance meeting today. And at the meeting of the 6 boards yesterday, there are so many housing initiatives that are being worked on that are really exciting and coming. And part of it will be using that funding stream. And if special town meeting is interested in doing the 3% community impact fee, that will be another funding stream potentially on professionally managed units, which is something. And as town council said, has to go in a la carte. It can't go in the general bylaw. So that's one thing. On the one dwelling unit, something that came out of our 10-hour in-person meeting was that Matt had a slide, and I'm unsure if you can pull this up later before the end of the meeting, where it showed the number of owners of who owns 1 STR, 2 STRs, 3 or more, right? And the worry is that if the market went down, whatever, 30, for argument's sake, 30%, that those blocks of those who own 1, 2 could be much higher than the outliers of the folks or entities, what have you, that own 3 or 4, right? So the policy is forward-looking in preventative to losing all the stuff that we're talking about, and again, bending the curve away from investor-only STRs. And then just on the definition of affordable or attaining, I agree with it's so fraught. Right now, this came up at our meeting yesterday, there are 2 houses currently on the market under $2 million. One of them is 1.6 million and is a 1950 1-bedroom that's unrenovated. right? So this whole conversation around what's at the moment, right? This is a shifting as the market changes and as conditions change. This STR conversation that we're recommending to a special town meeting, this is version 1.0, and the market and the lay of the land, so to speak, will be different in a year or two. So we can only gather what data we can have now and then make the best decisions we can. And then lastly, on the hardship cases, I think we just want to be a little cautious, and that's something that we would want to confer with Roberto and the Board of Health on how that would be managed. The Board of Health are all volunteers, and their workload on everything from septic systems to all kinds of things that they have to deal with is heavy already. So we definitely, before we get into what exactly that would be defined, I would want to hear from Roberto and staff on their recommendations for that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And just on that point, I keep meaning to tell you what I heard from Roberto and the Board of Health and what their concerns were. He mentioned three things, one of which I think is most relevant for you all. The first one was what I mentioned around documentation requests in order to enforce whatever bylaws. And so in particular, the 4 contracts, the 9 contracts, what you want to make sure that people will share with Granicus to make sure that you are actually monitoring how many contracts they have and are able to enforce that. The second was Roberto did not think that the Board of Health should be the board to which the people who want an undue hardship waiver should go to, because they are the enforcement board. He thought that there should be a separation between the enforcement and the sort of compassionate care, as he called it. And so he suggested that maybe there's a separate group that's set up to do that. Maybe it's the select board, maybe it's the ZBA. He didn't know, he just wasn't sure it should be the Board of Health. And then the last thing he mentioned was only about the definition of the word hosted and making sure that the reference to where that is found is correct. So adding that in there. Okay, William.
Okay, thank you. Just want to clarify a few things. First of all, I agree completely with Peter Schaefer. Affordable housing is not our chop. It's an incredibly complicated issue. I've been on this island for 40 years, and I have seen the hurt in so many people I know on the island. And whoever made the point earlier that $1 million is about all these people that you can afford in a doctor at the hospital that makes $400,000 can't even afford a $2 million home. I don't see how short-term rentals have anything remotely to do with that. But anyway, to get back to our point is the non-voting taxpayers, our issue is equality. It's not the pure number. If we come to a consensus on limiting to 4 or 10 or 20, it's one rule that applies to all, and it should be our objective. Thank you.
Yeah. And I will ask, I know, there's new points being made, but to just ask people not to repeat points that have already been made to the extent possible, to just make sure we're using our time as best we can. Jim?
Really quick on 2, then I'll talk about sunset. Yes, I agree about the talk about affordable housing. And I'm wondering if, to Karen's concern about 2 on a lot, if grandfathering will take care of that. I don't need an answer now, but I just think it might. And also inheritance of more than one family member would definitely take care of that going forward. I wanted to talk about the sunset provision. I find it interesting. I'll tell you what I possibly like and what I don't like about it. What worries me is if we have a sunset provision, could someone who wanted to be an investor only STR owner, could that person wait it out? Like 3 years, could they think, okay, yeah, okay, I'll just have 4 contracts for 3 years, but then I've got it, man, you know? Or would 5 years maybe be better at stopping that? It's not something I want to do, but it's something I would be willing to do if it gets our package through, people. So if there's strong support for it, I could go with it. I don't favor it. But I would think it should be 5 years anyway. I'm worried about losing the disincentive to have an
What's this
STR
you need is
that
just
is
a nine
investor only if we make it too short.
Sorry, William, I'm muting you. Go ahead. Sorry, Jim.
Yeah, so yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, John.
Thanks, Stacy. So, you know, every day when I look at it, prepare for our meetings and just keep brainstorming everything, there's one guiding principle that I have, and that is that the policies must work for everyone. And I want to just take a second on that, because we don't talk much about the zoning article, you know, with putting yes in all the columns. I don't like that, you know, I don't. But, you know, if the general bylaws are strong enough to limit STR growth and give some help to those local residents that need it, then I'll suck it up and vote for it, you know. But do I like it? No, I don't. But I will vote for the whole package as long as there is balance. And I think that's the main thing. You can't ask any of us to vote for something that doesn't really have the things that we need, big or small. So, you know, with that said, the 9 to 4 and the local exemption for me is the one article, it may be new, but it's the one article that does satisfy my need to see some limitation on growth, future growth, not affecting anyone at this point that's grandfathered. And it also will help some local people get their first attainable home. So, you know, the 9 to 4 for me is the one that must be there, and not as an a la carte. It must be there. The local exemption, though, yeah, I would compromise and say, okay, if we want to put that in as an a la carte item to be voted on outside of the package, okay, I guess I could live with that. But the main 9 to 4 for me cannot be a la carte. It must be in the main package, just like zoning, just like grandfathering. So that's kind of where I stand. I think when Robin said, you know, maybe price point should come into this somewhere. Yeah, I think Robin's right. Maybe that is an area where we could, you know, bring some compromise to it that would work for me anyway. I am definitely not in favor of pathways to the, you know, from 4 to 9. There is always a pathway, and it's called the town meeting. And every year there's an opportunity to, if we want to tinker with that and the voters want to, they can. But I'm not, because if we start tinkering with it and creating a pathway, we will destroy what we're trying to do, which is take investor only owners out of this. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, John. David.
Great. I agree with a lot of what John says. But I do think that a sunset is important if we're trying to reach consensus. And I do hear Robin, I don't agree with 3. I prefer 5, but I would agree with 4. But I just think that we're going to need that to create consensus. If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be for it. But I think it's a tool to create consensus. About the equality here that we keep on hearing about, I just point out to everyone that grandfathering is not equality either. Okay, so if we're going to stand on the mountain of equality, then grandfathering it doesn't belong there, because we're creating we already got it, you don't have it, you can't have it. So but I do support having a residential exemption as an a la carte if that satisfies the people who are against it. I'm concerned about adding price into the equation or value into the equation, because I think that it's important to make as simple as we can, and they're already complex enough. So I'm concerned about just adding a level of complexity. When it comes to the one person, I think we as a group have agreed we want to control churn, to try to tamp it down, to try to tamp down intensity of use. I think multiple STRs on one property is an attractive nuisance in some ways. I think that, you have 2 different families, 2 different houses right next to each other. They're rentals. I have an issue with that. So, maybe in that case, the person gets to split their 9 weeks between the 2 properties, but to have 2 STRs on one property, I think is against what we're trying to do here. So, and that's about all I have to say. Thanks.
David, Julia.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on Dave's comment about equality. I mean, I think what's being proposed, the grandfathering is absolutely, I completely agree with Dave. It's just not equal at all. It's not equality. It's not fair. And I think the people to whom it's the least fair are the people who live next door to those properties. We're asking the neighbors of commercial and corporate rentals to suck it up. And those, the likelihood that the properties that are being rented full-time as STRs to turn back into the market that they'll sell down the road, I don't buy it. I mean, it may happen 20 years down, it may happen, but they'll find a way to hide behind the front ownership and just sell the shares of the LLC and we won't catch it. So, the property values of those neighbors, does that go down for the time being? I think maybe it does. I think I have certainly had people who are really concerned who live next door to problematic, full-time STRs, that they were told by realtors, don't tell anyone you live next door to that. So I don't think this proposal is fair. I think from the get-go, the train has been on the on the runway to say that we're not going to consider year-rounders who want to rent on their own property differently. I'm glad that there's some acknowledgement that that's not always as easy as it may sound, and we can't treat people all the same if when there's a real public purpose, which is to help maintain community. But I have a lot of sort of nitpicks about, I get why the proposal is sort of saying, oh, maybe if we add, if we have this reduction in change in occupancy in July and August, that we might see reduction in the investor only buying, but I don't see that happening. I see that it's a very marginal, especially if you put a sunset on it. Then, they're buying a property, taking a couple of years to improve it. And then, they're just buying themselves a little time before it turns into a full-time STR. because actually it can always be a full-time STR, whether they can rent it 9 times or 4 times. So, you know, I agree with Dave and Jim that we have a lot in common in terms of where we want to end up, what we're trying to protect, what we're not trying to protect. But I think I stand for a lot of people who completely disagree that it's by bringing this zoning article and general bylaws that are sort of nibbling at the edge. And I really wish that this group, not, consultants in another room with town council, would be willing to have a conversation about an accessory use zoning article, what that could look like, in serious conversation, because we've been kept out of that. I feel like to some degree we've been herded on the zoning side.
So can I ask you a question about that, Julia? Sorry, because I think you're right, we haven't talked about it, but I really am curious if it said, if it were accessory use, do you have any way to say what the actual difference would be on people? And would we at all be providing a regulatory structure that reduces the threat of litigation? Or do you think we shouldn't be reducing the threat of litigation?
The threat of
We should
litigation is
have
coming
more
from the
litigation.
fact- Right, Stacey, the threat of litigation is coming from the fact that we are not addressing zoning. We're not addressing STRs in our zoning. And the
Right.
town
If
is,
you had accessory use,
right, if you had a definition in your zoning, in the local zoning, then you would have a clear law established.
what does accessory use allow you to do with your property? Is that clear?
Well, so it is clear, but it is enforceable by the ZBA. And so the town to some degree has a little bit of leeway.
But if the
idea
town-
is that,
So if the town were to say, if you don't know what the town is, like, I guess what I'm really trying to get at is, like, would people know exactly what will happen? Do they
It could be
know
written
what
that
will
way,
happen to
yes.
their property?
yeah,
What
could be
will
written that
happen
way.
to someone's property that's different if it were accessory versus not accessory?
yeah, I
What
mean,
is the-
that's where I think a lot of the void in the discussion has been is, what does that look like?
Right, and
And
what
so,
we heard from the lawyers is what that looks like is total legal uncertainty. That's what the lawyers have told us.
Right, and that's great.
So
From-
is that what you want to happen, is total
No, and
legal
but it's
uncertainty?
one opinion of one lawyer, no offense. And that's not every lawyer's opinion.
But
And
if
so
if
if,
there is a
so
lawyer who
let's put it
believes that
this
it's
way.
uncertain, that means there are lawyers who will sue.
Stacey, there will be litigations, and I think Peter Schaefer mentioned this a long time ago. There will be litigation on this topic, likely for different reasons over the years. And we've heard that from other communities, right?
That's not the litigation
And-
people are concerned about here.
Right, and if you had a law on the books, you would moot legal cases because you would have a clear law on the books. Whether there was a clear enforcement, against a property that was in violation of a zoning, that's a different, that's still a case.
Right, but Julia, I guess I'm trying to understand. Would there be STRs that would operate according to these bylaws that would be legal if we pass the zoning as it is written here, that would you think would be made illegal if the zoning were to change to say accessory use, and which would those be?
The full-time STRs,
Only full-time?
those that are
If
used
somebody's there for
primarily
1
or
week a year?
primarily or exclusively as STRs.
But
Correct.
primarily versus exclusively are two very, very different
I
things.
understand, but this conversation has not happened as a group. And we've relied on a consultant and a lawyer to tell us that we should give up the zoning.
You've relied on town staff, right? The town's lawyer.
On town council and town staff and the consultant.
But I think if you think there is a very strong case to be made that no one who lives in their house ever can be sued, I think it'd be a different conversation to have. I think that the concern is that nobody's heard any such opinion. That the only opinions that the group have heard is that you cannot get an end to litigation for short-term rental users without this.
No, and I disagree with that, because the question that's in front of the courts is the interpretation of the bylaw, because there is no bylaw. We don't have a zoning bylaw. If we had a zoning bylaw, then the question that's posed to the courts right now would not be proposed.
Be a
The
different
question would be, is there a zoning infraction? And
Right,
that's
and the question
something
would
that
be,
can dealt with at the
what
local
counts
level.
as accessory use, and it would be up to the courts to figure that out.
Yeah, but the town would establish something and they would, I don't see that as a problem. Accessory use is very well established in law. That's not an issue.
But if it wouldn't change it, why do you think instead,
saying-
why don't you
I'm-
argue that dwelling units owned by a corporation should not be grandfathered?
Right.
Why don't you, that's what I'm asking you, like, would you, instead of arguing that it should be accessory use, which I think the legal.
So, like, a corporation is just an owner. The use of a property is zoning,
I see.
right? That's where I think that the general bylaws really get you in a pickle, because there are loopholes and workarounds to most of these things. Whereas in zoning, it's the use of the property. And you can't get around the way the property is being used.
Well, you can if you don't, unless you're gonna make people prove how many days they are present, right?
If there are infractions,
Yeah.
there's backup. In this case, if it's a corporation, well, there are structures or lawyers going to work really hard to make sure that they can work around it. If you can only have one, well, we can have multiple people, people splitting up. And so that's the big issue around ownership. And that's why that's
Yeah.
all I wanted to say is I wish
Okay,
this-
and just Julia, just to mention, the other thing we heard very strongly from the town's attorney is that putting it into the zoning would grandfather. So it would again be lawsuits if you.
I disagree.
But
And I'm not a
because you
lawyer.
Disagree.
I disagree because
But therefore it would be
did some
lawsuits,
work on
yes.
this. And to be able to grandfather something, it has to be expressly listed in your
Got it.
zone.
Got it. Okay. So I think you've made your case. And I will hand over. I wanted to make sure that actually got raised and others can respond. Jim?
Okay, I want to go back to this, to a detail residential exemption in the 9.4 thing as an a la carte. I want to say two things about it. First, I'm opposed to that because I think it would be a very, very popular part of this, of the package that would help it get through. But I want to propose a possible tweak to that, but I don't know how people will think about this. We all know that when someone buys their first home, they are exempt from paying land bank taxes, right? So what if instead of making it an exemption, and I'm hoping that what we're trying to do is encourage first-time ownership. So this is just a thought, but I want to see what people think. What if instead of making it a residential exemption, we make it an exemption for a resident purchasing a first home, which would be a smaller subset, but perhaps would be less a problem for people. I don't know. I want to throw that out because I think we could possibly make it as first-time ownership of a resident, and that would still have a very good effect, I think. And I think probably most of those buyers would be in that condition anyway. But I'm just curious if that would be more acceptable to the people that don't like it, or more acceptable to the people that do.
Thanks, Jim. Robin.
I had some other points I wanted to comment on, Dave's one dwelling issue, et cetera, but I want to come back to the conversation you and Julia were having. Giving something that the ZBA can rule on gives zero comfort to anyone on this island. Because even though the building inspector and the ZBA have made determinations that something is the correct use, those have been appealed to the land court and potentially higher courts and inflicted immense pain on STR operators. So I think many feel that it is critical to stop both town administration, the island taxpayers and STR operators from getting whipsawed by the legal ambiguity currently, and to codify STRs as a legal use, but then regulating, which is what we are trying to do, regulating and limiting that usage, but to shut down these lawsuits, to stop the waste of time and money for the town, taxpayers, STR operators, everybody, and move on to more productive things. So, but I want to come to what Dave's point was about multiple, because he raised a very good point, that it would be mayhem if somebody has 2 different units or 3 different units on a lot, and they've got, one lease here, one lease there, a third lease kind of going on. So you have a lot of activity. That's a great point. But there's a way to limit it. You say it's one lease per time for all units, because many people have extended family that they bring to the island. So you have grandparents. I have many multi-generational families. The grandparents stay in the main house, the grandkids stay in the cottage. That is a very frequent traditional use. And for myself, I only let one family rent all, both properties or both dwellings at the same time. So there's a way we could nip that in the bud. Something that we have not addressed in any of this is seasonal cottages. That is a problem for both year-round taxpayers who live on the island, as well as non-residents. Seasonal cottages are a real problem that may fall through the cracks with what we are proposing. I don't know what percentage of the dwellings or STRs that is on island, but it's something we need to address. The last point is that I'd really like to push us to consider, because I think it would be a huge vote winner, a lever which stops or seriously impedes purchases of homes at a price point, over a price point. So we've been talking about 2 million. I don't know if it's 1.7 million or 1.5 million, and maybe it's very few transactions, but just the fact that this group attempts to do something like that, shows that sensitivity, I think that would be a huge plus and something that we can hold out to the island as something we're trying to do.
Robin, sorry, what was your proposal?
The proposal is that there is a lever where we actually stop or limit, or I don't know exactly the right way, but purchases of housing at a certain price point.
Because I think the concern, sorry, just to say, because I think the concern people had raised about that was that some year-round people who purchase homes at that price need to be able to short-term rent. So you wouldn't want to say no short-term rental below that price point. What would you say that would prevent seasonal or people who are using it for
so I wouldn't want to, I don't want to think this, I don't want to kind of come up with the answer on the fly.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but I think it is a vote winner. And I think it's something that we really should address at a real price point lever. And if something has to be worked out about year-rounders or whatever it is, but to stop, we keep talking about stopping the erosion of attainable housing, at a certain price point, but we're dancing around the issue. Let's try to find a way to address it.
Thanks, Chairman. Dave? And then I think we're gonna have to turn to public comment.
Yeah, just a couple of things. I think I think Robin was really onto something with that, with the discussion about multiple housing units on one piece of property. I think that I guess the question is when you register, are you registering just one with the state? Or when you register your property, right? So I would 100% agree with Robin on that, hey, if it's one lease for the whole property, great, but we're not going to have separate leases. That makes no sense and really works against what we're trying to achieve. So secondly, if Julia, and if I can ask just Julia directly, and I'm not looking to get into a fight about it, and I'm not even going to respond, I would just like her to define accessory use for us.
So
If I may.
I am not the ZBA and I'm not the town. They would be in the best position to decide how they want to define it.
But in your
As a
head,
general-
yeah, go ahead.
As a general idea, it is an activity that is subordinate to the main activity. It's what Judy Barrett mentioned in one of our meetings, I think, and she referred to it as, well, what's the main activity? Well, in terms of in a residential district, right? I think in a commercial district, you could argue that any commercial activity could be the main activity. But in a residential district, the main activity of a home, the main use of a home would be as a residence, as someone's long-term rental or as someone's home that they use.
Okay.
And so that's the main use. And then the accessory use becomes a subordinate, so less than the use as a home.
So
But I think there is some wiggle room in there too.
So if it's a 10-week season, people have a summer to use their house. And earlier you said, well, if they rent for 6 weeks, that's an accessory use. But actually that would be the primary use in that case, because
Not necessarily, we don't know how much they stay there.
well, most people don't stay here past the end of August or the beginning of June.
Actually, a lot, well, I don't know about that, Dave. Like, I think we've heard a lot of stories over the years of people who say, I actually come during the shoulder season.
I mean, I think
No.
there's exceptions. I'm just concerned that there's not as many as we think there are. And among other problems with accessory use, I think that it would really, really be devastating financially. And that's just my personal opinion. I don't have data to base it on at the moment, but that's just my concern with that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Very quickly, Stacy, I just want to ask on the policy lever that says no short-term rental unit may change occupancy more than 9 times. Okay, fine. And then the next one, if a property is sold after this bylaw, the unit cannot change occupancy more than 4 times during August. Do we want to put in parentheses the residential exemption that we've been discussing, even though we did vote on it a few weeks ago, but could we put that in? Because last week it wasn't in when we went to the to the planning board, and someone rightfully, I think it was Peter, said, hey, they're talking about this too. So maybe it'd be better to put it in black and white if we could.
yeah, thanks for that.
Thank you.
Okay. So I think we should stop and take public comment. I do want to just confirm with the group. I want to take the Board of Health's comments seriously and see if we can raise this issue tomorrow with the select board as well, if there's a different body that might be more appropriate for this particular role. So clearly more to do here. And we will present this to the Board of Health, to the Select Board tomorrow. We will hear and discuss with them and get some more input. As much as I hate to do it, I am wondering if we should try to convene again next Tuesday, the 20th, to continue deliberating, because the following week, the 27th, really is a we have to kind of have our package in order to meet all of the town deadlines for moving this forward. So how do people feel about meeting next Tuesday to continue discussion? Is that doable? Is there anyone for whom that is impossible?
No, definitely.
Okay.
What was the time?
I think same time, so 5 to 8.
What day again, Stacy? I didn't hear him.
Next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday, the 20th.
I don't think we have a choice. We have to get this done.
All right, let me take public comment. Semanish, turning to you to do this.
Okay, Scott Wilson, you are now allowed to talk.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I have 3 questions. One is, has the draft warrant article that we saw a couple of weeks ago been revised at all by town council? I see somebody nodding yes.
I don't know I think that the most recent version has been shared on the website, but I can.
Okay. I haven't checked in 2 weeks. Okay,
It's dated June 7th.
thank you. So during a recent meeting of this group, I suggested the formation of a drafting committee in an effort to ensure concise wording that captures the clear intent in that bylaw. After all, we don't want to see a battle of amendment proposals at town meeting like we saw with some other things a couple of weeks ago. So I don't know where I thought my idea sort of resonated with somebody, and I don't know if any action's been taken on that, a drafting committee, just purely to capture the intent of the group, not to negotiate substantive points of the group. Third point, there's no connection in the warrant article to occupancy limits. And I'm wondering if we can't build that in, the bedrooms times 2 + 2 formula that I think is the general rule. We'd love to see that. I represent Nashop. We have people renting houses here for up to 20 people, and that's out of control. I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. And Kathy, I see you. So why don't you go next?
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. So just wanted to touch on 2 things. One is to clarify the comment that Robin made on the seasonal cottages. I think the concern that I've had from people calling me is, we're grandfathered, that's great, but when the seasonal cottage is sold, the next owner will only be able to rent 4 weeks in the summertime, or four leases in the summertime. And that's really the only purpose of those seasonal cottages. They'll never be in the year-round communities bucket of housing. So that was the concern there is what do you do with those? Because they really aren't year-round housing in any shape or form. So that was one thing. And then the other thing, I think Karen had a really good point about, the LLCs. So I had a year-round family in my subgroup. When we had the public input meeting, it was a family, like the parents, they had a main home and they had a cottage. They rented the cottage mostly. Sometimes they would rent the whole property. The daughter lived across the street and she would rent rooms in her house. And so they're under an LLC. So that was the question they had. And I think that Karen was right. We need to define that. Do they get to operate 3? Do they get to operate 1? Because it's 2 different properties. So we really need to get that stuff defined. And I also think that a meeting on the 20th is absolutely, we have to do that. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Kathy. Okay, Bruce Mandel.
Oh, thank you. Just 3 quick points. Congratulations to Matt. I saw at the town manager's meeting where the contract was increased and extended to year end. So congratulations on that, because we certainly need more work from you. Number 2, our community has what I'll describe a fairness concern. We have more than a few properties that STR out here without going through any registration process. They don't use realtors, Airbnb, or other such platforms. Some are corporates and some are individual folks. They either rent to visitors who come back year after year or get their renters, for example, through festival management directly by offering their units to festival goers or festival staff. We have no way to find out if they're registered, pay their fees and the like, but this interrupts the community. They have garage apartments, waterfront cottages, illegal second curb cuts and driveways that heavily affect the infrastructure here. And it would be nice if the committee would address this dynamic. I'm getting some feedback from other people here. I don't know what's going on. This is the second time we've had public forums. And our group met this weekend about this. And it's kind of contrived. It's felt that the public forum process is contrived because we're fed a handful, 5, 9, 7 issues to discuss. And small work groups are put together to discuss just those contrived elements. And there's no other dialogue from the public process. It's very limiting and discouraging. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Caroline Bolcher should be able to unmute.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I am going to frame a question that I put to the group. So it's a series of questions, but it's my comment. Does any of the data demonstrate or quantify churn per se? How is churn different from the normal effects of high season that's occurred on Nantucket for over a century, as evidenced by both the Enquirer Mirror and also the Nantucket Historical Association's current exhibit at the museum? The term churn seems to contain bias. For example, why are weekly house cleaners parked in private driveways pointed to as churn, but not are many large fundraisers given on private property during high season? Thank you.
Thank you. Alvin Fargo.
Hello again. I have a question on something that kind of surprised me. I was looking at your updated draft policy proposal. Next to last says, those with existing short-term rental certificates may continue to engage in short-term rentals until. Does anybody have an existing short-term rental certificate? That's my question, because, and I'm not sure what you're referring to. If we're talking about the state, yeah, we've been paying, I'm registered with the state. We have a certificate, we pay the taxes. We've done doing that every year. But when I tried to apply under bylaw 123 for a Nantucket short-term rental certificate, I was told it was premature. They didn't, the Department of Public Health did not have the paperwork. And that, as far as I know, they still don't. I haven't been advised that they do. And they told me that Granicus would be in touch with me and would give me information. So I'm really very confused to see that one of your policies is those with existing short-term rental certificates may continue to engage. Can you help me, please?
I don't know, Megan, if you have an answer to that yet, or if that's just something we should come back to.
Stacy, if I could.
Yeah, Dave.
Just to make it clear, I think, and anyone on the board can call me out, but in all the references when we are talking about certificates at this point, we're talking about the state certificate. We're not because the town certificate doesn't really exist, other than when we refer to it in gathering data later in the process, then we might be talking about the town one. But currently, I think 99% of the time, we're talking about the state certificate, Alvin.
But you talk about, you keep it until it's conveyed, transferred, conveyed, or not renewed. We don't really renew it, because you see, we don't have to pay the fee that 123 requires us to pay to Nantucket. That's my confusion here.
At some point, it will be the Nantucket certificate we talk about when we get there. But currently, all our discussion is based on the state.
But isn't this the grandfather? Isn't this intended to be a grandfather? That's what. So how do we get grandfathered? Are you are you saying that if we had the Massachusetts certificate that we've been paying taxes all these years, we'll be grandfathered?
That is, I believe,
That's wonderful. That's a huge clarification. Appreciate it.
Great.
Very much.
All right, everyone. Thank you all for your comments. Thanks to the members of the public who sit through all of this and don't get to speak till the end. I recognize it's challenging, but as you have heard, the group itself has a lot of work to do, and we really need all the time we can to focus on that. So we will come back together tomorrow for the select board meeting. We will come back as the short-term rental working group next Tuesday. I will potentially send you a little homework between now and then. And looking forward to it. Thanks, everybody, for a really good meeting.
Good night.
Bye.